I thought the lake was the thing they stole from me, but at 5:17 that morning, with my hand wrapped around the frozen steel wheel of the dam gate, I realized the lake had been waiting to testify. The first sound was not water. It was metal. A long, dry, stubborn screech that scraped across the dark like an old door opening in a courthouse nobody knew was still standing. My name is Caleb Whitmore, and I was standing below the private dam my grandfather built in 1978, wearing mud on my boots, fog in my lungs, and 32 years of family history pressing against my ribs. Above me, behind a wall of poured concrete and hand-set stone, thousands of gallons of cold water pushed and rolled in the blackness, heavy enough to make the ground hum under my feet. Across the lake, the 109 cabins that the Silver Pines HOA had built without my permission glowed with soft yellow porch lights. Neat little boxes of cedar and glass arranged along my shoreline like they had always belonged there. Their windows reflected on the surface of my water. Their gravel paths cut through my grass. Their rental signs stood where my father used to park his old Ford pickup on Sunday mornings before we went fishing. A white banner snapped in the wind between two pine trees, the words Luxury Lakefront Cabins printed in gold letters big enough to be seen from the county road. I could smell wet leaves, diesel, fresh-cut lumber, and the sour mud that always rose from the spillway before a release. Somewhere in the distance, a loose piece of siding tapped against one of the cabins in the breeze. Tick, 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 like a clock counting down. Marjorie Caldwell, the president of the Silver Pines HOA, had told everyone I was a bitter man trying to stand in the way of progress. She had stood in a clubhouse full of neighbors, real estate agents, and contractors, smiling with her perfect white hair and her clipboard pressed to her chest, and said, "Paperwork does not stop progress, Mr. Whitmore." People laughed when she said it. They laughed harder when she called my lake a shared visual amenity, like my grandfather had dug it for her brochures, like my father had maintained the dam for her weekend guests, like the deed in my fireproof safe was just an old family superstition. I did not laugh. I did not shout. I did not threaten anyone. I went home, opened the same metal filing cabinet my father had kept in the back room, and read every survey, every water rights certificate, every inspection report, every yellowed map until the sun came up. That was when I found the red line. Emergency release corridor. No permanent structures allowed. It ran straight through the east bank, exactly where Marjorie had planted her little resort. Now, as dawn began to gray the tops of the pines, I turned the wheel one full rotation, then another. The gate groaned below me. Behind the concrete, the water shifted. Not rushing yet, just answering. The cabins still looked peaceful from across the lake, with their porch swings and fake welcome mats and little numbered plaques screwed beside the doors. Cabin 17, Cabin 42, Cabin 88, Cabin 109. They had been sold as lakefront escapes. By sunrise, they would be something else entirely. They would be evidence. The place had never felt like property to me. Property was a word lawyers used, a word printed in black ink with parcel numbers and seals from the county clerk. To me, Whitmore Lake was the smell of pine needles baking in July heat, the creak of my father's aluminum tackle box, the cold bite of water around my ankles when I was 8 years old and brave enough to wade out past the old boat ramp. My grandfather, Harold Whitmore, bought those 86 acres before Silver Pines had a single mailbox. Back then it was scrub pine, low pasture, and a spring-fed hollow that flooded every March and dried into cracked clay by August. He was not a developer. He ran a feed store, fixed tractors on weekends, and believed that if you promised land you would take care of it, you did not break that promise just because someone offered money later. In 1978, he got the permits, hired a local excavation crew, and spent 2 years shaping that hollow into a private lake with a controlled spillway and a small concrete dam tied into the natural drainage basin. He kept every receipt in coffee cans and every approved drawing in a metal cabinet that still smelled like dust, oil, and old paper. My father inherited the place next, and he treated that dam like it was a member of the family. Every spring he walked the bank with a measuring rod. Every fall he cleared leaves from the spillway. After hard rain, he would wake before daylight, pull on his work coat, and drive down to check the water level before he even made coffee. When I was a boy, I thought he was just being particular. Later, I understood. Water looks peaceful until you forget it has rules. He taught me those rules without making them sound like lessons. He would point at the painted gauge beside the spillway and say, 2 inches makes a difference, Caleb. He would tap the old survey stake by the east bank and tell me never to trust a fence more than a recorded line. He would make me read the maintenance log out loud, not because I cared about culverts or discharge rates, but because he wanted me to know that owning something did not mean squeezing money out of it. It meant answering for it. When he died, the house felt too quiet, and the lake felt louder than ever. I kept the place simple. No rental docks, no wedding venue, no luxury anything. Just a gravel drive, a weathered boathouse, a locked gate, and the same hand-painted sign my father made that said private property, no lake access beyond this point. I paid the taxes, kept the dam inspected, filed the water reports, and fixed what storms broke. For years, nobody bothered me. Then Silver Pines Estates pushed its final phase up to my western boundary, and suddenly the quiet changed. First came the survey flags that were not mine. Then came the white vinyl fences facing my tree line like teeth. Then came the glossy mailers showing smiling families beside blue water that did not belong to them. I remember standing at my mailbox one afternoon with one of those mailers in my hand, staring at a photograph of my own shoreline under the words, Future Lakeside Lifestyle. That was the first time I saw Marjorie Caldwell's name printed at the bottom, president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. As if a title on coated paper could reach across a property line and rename what my family had protected for nearly 50 years. Marjorie Caldwell did not introduce herself like a neighbor. She introduced herself like an inspection notice. The first time she came to my gate, she arrived in a pearl-white sport utility vehicle with Silver Pines HOA printed on a magnetic sign across the driver's side door, the kind of sign you can peel off when you want to pretend you never said what you said. She stepped out wearing a cream-colored blazer, oversized sunglasses, and shoes so clean they looked offended by gravel. Behind her stood a younger man in a polo shirt holding a tablet, and another man with a measuring wheel who kept glancing at my fence line like he had already been told where to pretend it was. I walked down from the house with my work gloves still tucked in my back pocket and the smell of chainsaw oil on my shirt from clearing a fallen branch near the spillway. Before I reached the gate, Marjorie smiled and said, Mr. Whitmore, I am glad you are finally making yourself available. Not hello, not nice to meet you. Just that, as if my own driveway was a waiting room and I had missed an appointment. I told her the gate was locked for a reason. She tapped her clipboard with one manicured finger and said Silver Pines was beginning a beautification and access coordination plan for the lakefront area. Lakefront area. That was how she said it, soft and smooth, like changing the words could soften the theft. I told her there was no lakefront area owned by Silver Pines. There was my land, my water, my dam, and a recorded boundary line older than her entire subdivision. Her smile stayed in place, but it got thinner. She said, Caleb, communities evolve. Private paperwork from decades ago does not always reflect modern neighborhood needs. I remember the wind moving through the pine trees behind her, dry needles whispering against each other, and I remember the measuring wheel clicking once when the man behind her shifted his weight. That tiny click put a cold knot in my stomach. I asked if they had surveyed my property. Marjorie lifted her sunglasses onto her head and looked past me toward the water glittering through the trees. She said residents had invested significant money for Lakeview homes, and it was not reasonable for one individual to deny an entire community the enjoyment of a natural resource. Natural resource? My grandfather's excavation permits were in my office. The dam inspection logs were in my filing cabinet. The property tax bills came to my mailbox every year. But in her mouth, all of that became selfishness. I told her to leave. Politely. Clearly. Twice. The man with the tablet started recording me after the second time, holding the device low against his chest like he was catching evidence of me being unreasonable. Marjorie leaned closer to the gate and lowered her voice just enough to make it feel personal. She said, You will find that Silver Pines has more influence in this county than you think. Then she slid a folded letter through the bars. It landed in the dust at my boots with the HOA seal facing up, even though I was not a member of her HOA and never had been. I did not pick it up until her vehicle backed out and rolled away, leaving pale tire dust hanging in the sunlight. The letter called my locked gate an obstruction to community planning. It requested voluntary cooperation, then threatened legal remedies if I interfered with approved improvements. At the bottom was Marjorie's signature in blue ink, looping and confident, right above the phrase, shared visual amenity. I stood there for a long time, listening to the lake behind me and the last fading tick of gravel under her tires, and I knew this was not a misunderstanding. This was a test. She wanted to see whether the man behind the gate would bark, fold, or disappear. I did none of those. I walked back to the house, scanned the letter, placed the original in a plastic sleeve, and wrote the date across the top in black marker. It was the first piece of evidence she handed me herself. 2 weeks after Marjorie slid that letter through my gate, my mother called from a hospital room 3 counties away and tried to sound calm while machines beeped behind her. She said it was only a scare, that the doctors were being careful, that I did not need to drive all night. I was already putting clothes in a duffel bag before she finished the sentence. Before I left, I locked the gate, checked the spillway, photographed the water gauge, and walked the east bank under a pale evening sky that smelled like rain. Nothing looked different yet, but the silence had changed. There were tire tracks pressed into the soft shoulder near the old fence line, and one of my survey stakes had been nudged sideways, not removed, just tested. I took pictures of that too. Then I drove out, chained the gate behind me, and told myself I would be gone only a few days. A few days became 3 weeks. My mother needed follow-up visits, medication changes, someone to sit beside her kitchen table and make sure she ate more than toast and coffee. Every night, after she fell asleep in her recliner, I checked the cameras on my phone. The one at the gate went offline first. Not all at once. It flickered for 2 days, showed static, came back with a blurred view of pine branches, then finally died at 2:13 in the morning. The camera near the boathouse showed headlights moving through the trees one night, then nothing but a gray screen. I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line and filed a report. I emailed Silver Pines and told them any entry onto my land was trespassing. The response came from Marjorie's office the next afternoon, polished and empty, saying the association had no knowledge of unauthorized activity and remained committed to neighborly cooperation. I read that sentence in my mother's kitchen while the refrigerator hummed and rain tapped the window over the sink, and I felt something colder than anger settle into my chest. When I finally drove home, it was just after sunrise. The closer I got, the more wrong the air felt. Before I reached my driveway, I heard the machines. Not birds. Not wind through pine. Machines. A saw whining somewhere beyond the trees. A backup alarm chirping in steady little bursts. The dull thump of lumber hitting earth. Then the smell came through my truck vents, sharp and fresh and impossible to mistake. Cut cedar, diesel exhaust, hot asphalt, wet concrete. My gate was still there, but the chain had been cut and replaced with a bright new lock that was not mine. A laminated sign hung from the bars with the Silver Pines logo at the top and the words "Authorized Construction Access" only printed underneath. For a few seconds, I just sat behind the wheel with both hands on the steering wheel, listening to the engine idle and feeling my pulse in my jaw. Then I got out, took photographs, and walked the fence line until I found where they had pushed a gravel road through the brush 50 yards south of the gate. It ran straight across my grass, fresh and pale, the stones still clean from the quarry. I followed it on foot, boots crunching over rock that should not have been there, and when the trees opened, my lake was no longer quiet. The east bank had become a construction site. Cabins stood in rows along the water, some finished, some wrapped in house wrap, some with workers still carrying trim boards up porch steps. 109 of them, though I did not know the number yet. I only knew they kept going, cabin after cabin, with identical windows facing my water like eyes. Little black number plaques were already screwed beside the doors. Orange extension cords crossed the mud. White plastic pipes disappeared under fresh gravel. A temporary sales banner hung between 2 posts where my father's old boat rack used to be. I remember the ridiculous neatness of it most. The matching porch lights. The stacked welcome mats. The potted shrubs waiting to be planted. Theft usually looks messy in your imagination. This looked organized. This looked invoiced. This looked like someone had held meetings, approved budgets, ordered materials, and convinced dozens of people that my absence was permission. Near cabin 17, a foreman in a yellow vest noticed me and started walking over with the irritated confidence of a man who thought I was the intruder. I looked past him to the water, to the shoreline my grandfather shaped, to the place my father taught me that 2 inches mattered, and I took out my phone. I did not yell. I did not touch a board. I just started recording, because every nail they drove into that bank was another sentence in the confession Marjorie Caldwell was building for herself. The foreman stopped 10 feet from me and asked who I was like he had caught me wandering through a job site. He had sawdust on one sleeve, a radio clipped to his vest, and a folded site plan tucked under his arm with the Silver Pines logo printed across the corner. I kept my phone steady and told him my name. Caleb Whitmore. The name on the deed. The name on the tax records. The name on the water rights and the dam inspection files. For half a second, his face changed. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. His eyes flicked toward the cabins, then toward the gravel road, then back to my camera. He said, "You need to speak with the association." I told him I had spoken with the association and that every person, tool, vehicle, pipe, board, and structure on that bank was sitting on private property without permission. He looked uncomfortable then, not guilty exactly, but like a man hearing a smoke alarm in a building he had been told was safe. He said they were working off approved plans. I asked approved by whom. He did not answer. Behind him, a nail gun popped 3 times, sharp and careless in the morning air. A worker laughed near cabin 24. A small excavator coughed black exhaust beside a trench that cut through the east slope. I walked past the foreman slowly, still recording, and filmed everything. The cut chain hanging from my gate in the bed of one pickup. The new lock with a brass tag. The tire tracks across the grass. The fresh gravel road. The white plastic pipe disappearing beneath cabin 17. The orange electrical cord running through a puddle near cabin 42. The concrete piers under cabin 88, shallow and crooked, with wet mud squeezed around them like paste. Every detail mattered. My father's voice was in my head the whole time, calm and plain. Never argue with a bad survey when a good record exists. By noon, I had called the sheriff's office, the county building department, the environmental desk, and my attorney, a quiet man named Martin Reese who had handled my father's estate. Martin listened without interrupting while I sat in my truck at the edge of my own property, watching strangers carry porch railings across my grass. When I finished, he asked one question. "Did you touch anything?" I said no. He said good. Then he told me to document, notify, and let them make their mistakes in writing. So I did. I printed photographs. I emailed time-stamped video. I sent certified letters to Silver Pines, the contractor, the county, and Marjorie Caldwell personally. I posted fresh no trespassing signs on the remaining fence posts and photographed those too. For 3 days, the response was silence, but the construction did not stop. If anything, it sped up. Trucks arrived before sunrise. Porch lights were installed. Gravel paths were raked smooth. Little shrubs appeared in black nursery pots, lined up like decorations for a lie. On the 4th day, Marjorie called me herself. Her voice was bright, almost cheerful, with the faint clink of ice in a glass behind her. She told me there had been a misunderstanding about old boundary descriptions, and that Silver Pines was willing to offer me a courtesy access fee in exchange for cooperation. I asked if she was offering to buy the land. She laughed softly and said, "Not the land, Caleb, just your attitude." Then she said the cabins were already booked for the opening weekend. Deposits had been collected, and any attempt to interfere would be treated as harassment of the association and its guests. I remember looking through my windshield at cabin 109, where a man was hanging a fake wooden sign that said "Welcome Home," and feeling the world narrow into one clean line. She thought money, pressure, and embarrassment would make me step back from my own shoreline. She thought calling trespass progress would make it progress. That evening, I went to the Silver Pines clubhouse with a banker's box full of documents, because Marjorie had made one mistake powerful people always make when they are too used to being believed. She had put me on the agenda. The Silver Pines clubhouse smelled like lemon cleaner, carpet glue, and catered coffee that had been sitting too long on a warming plate. It was the kind of room designed to make authority look harmless. Beige walls, framed subdivision maps, folding chairs in tidy rows, a little table with cookies from a grocery store bakery. But that night, every chair was filled, and people were standing along the back wall with their phones already out. Word had spread that the man from the old lake property was coming to complain, and Marjorie had dressed the room for a performance. She sat at the center table beneath the association seal, wearing a navy jacket and that same calm smile, with 2 board members on one side and the HOA attorney on the other. The contractor stood near the side door, arms folded, pretending to study a fire exit sign. When my name was called, I carried the banker's box to the front and set it on the table. The cardboard made a flat, heavy sound that quieted the room for half a second. I started with the deed, then the survey, then the water rights certificate, then the most recent dam inspection. I laid each document down one at a time, not fast, not dramatic, just steady enough that the room had to watch the paper pile grow. I explained that Silver Pines had no easement across my land, no recorded right to access the lake, no permit for me to build, and no authority to replace my lock or cut a road through my property. A few people shifted in their chairs. Someone in the back whispered, but Marjorie raised one hand as if she were calming children before a school assembly. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore, but these older documents do not reflect the current understanding between Silver Pines and the surrounding community." Current understanding. I remember those words because the HOA attorney looked down the moment she said them. I asked her if she had a signed easement. She said the association had relied on legal guidance. I asked if she had a recorded transfer of lake access. She said access was implied by community design. I asked if she had a permit from the dam owner to construct within the regulated drainage area. Her smile twitched, just once, then came back brighter. She told the room that I was using technicalities to sabotage family recreation and neighborhood value. That was when people started clapping. Not everyone, but enough. A woman in the second row said her grandchildren were excited for opening weekend. A man in a golf shirt said property values depended on shared amenities. Another person asked why I needed a whole lake to myself. Their words came at me like paper cuts, small and sharp, but I kept my hands on the box and let them finish. Then Marjorie leaned toward the microphone and said I was a bitter man who believed a puddle made him important. The room laughed. It rolled over the folding chairs and bounced off the beige walls, warm and ugly. I looked at the attorney again. He was no longer looking at me. He was staring at the documents on the table, especially the dam inspection report with the county stamp in the corner. That was the first moment I understood the truth was not hidden from everyone. Some of them knew exactly where the danger was. They just hoped nobody would say it clearly enough to matter. So I reached into the box and pulled out photographs from the construction site. The cut chain, the altered lock, the gravel road, the pipe under cabin 17, the temporary electrical line near cabin 42, the shallow piers behind cabin 88. Marjorie interrupted before I could finish. She said the association would not be intimidated by selective images and emotional storytelling. Then, with phones recording and board members nodding beside her, she said the words that later did more damage than any document I brought. She said, "Silver Pines has assumed operational control of the lakefront for the benefit of its residents." I repeated her sentence back slowly and asked if that was her official position. She lifted her chin and said yes. I wrote it down in my notebook, closed the banker's box, and thanked her. People thought I was giving up because I walked out quietly. But outside, under the white parking lot lights, with crickets buzzing in the grass and my father's old files under my arm, I felt the shape of the case settle into place. Marjorie had not just ignored my property line. She had claimed responsibility for what she built on the wrong side of it. That night, I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with the banker's box open, the overhead light buzzing softly, and every document spread around me in careful stacks. Outside the window, the lake was hidden in the dark, but I could hear it against the rocks, small waves tapping the shore like knuckles on a door. I kept replaying Marjorie's sentence in my head. Silver Pines has assumed operational control. She had said it proudly, publicly, with phones recording and her attorney sitting beside her. Most people would hear arrogance. Martin Reese heard liability. When I called him the next morning, he was quiet for a long moment, then asked me to bring him everything connected to the dam, not just the deed. Not the pretty papers people understand. The ugly papers. Maintenance logs. Inspection diagrams. Spillway drawings. Drainage maps. Emergency procedures. The things nobody reads until something goes wrong. So I went to the back room where my father kept the old metal filing cabinet, the one with a dent in the top from when I dropped a wrench on it as a teenager. The drawer stuck halfway open, just like it always had, and the smell that came out of it nearly stopped me. Dust, machine oil, old cardboard, and my father's pipe tobacco, even though he had been gone for years. I pulled files until my fingers turned gray at the edges. There were annual inspection forms clipped with rusted paper clips, county letters from the 1980s, receipts for concrete patching, photographs of the spillway after storms, handwritten water-level notes in my father's blocky blue ink. Then, at the bottom of a folder labeled East Basin, I found the map. It was folded into quarters, yellowed along the creases, with the county engineer's stamp pressed faintly in the corner. When I opened it flat on the table, I saw the old lake outline, the dam, the spillway, the natural drainage slope, and a red corridor cutting across the east bank like a warning nobody had bothered to remember. My mouth went dry before I even read the label. Emergency Release Corridor. No permanent structures allowed. The red line ran directly through the place where the cabins stood. Not near them, not around them, through them. I set a coffee mug on one corner of the paper and leaned over it until my shadow covered the map. Cabin 17 sat over the lower drainage groove. Cabin 42 stood where the temporary overflow channel widened. Cabin 88 was planted almost exactly on the old access berm used for dam maintenance. The whole project had not just crossed my property line. It had blocked the path the water was legally designed to take when the dam needed to release pressure. I called Martin again, and this time I heard his chair creak as he sat forward. He told me to scan the map, photograph it in place, and not mention it to Marjorie yet. Then he gave me a list of offices to notify in writing. County Water Resources, the Building Department, Environmental Compliance, Emergency Management, the Sheriff's Office, and the insurance carrier listed on the contractor's permit application if I could find it. By afternoon, I had sent certified letters and emails with attachments so large my computer fan sounded like it was trying to lift off the desk. Every message said the same thing in plain language. Unauthorized permanent structures had been placed inside a recorded emergency release corridor connected to a privately owned dam. I did not accuse anyone of anything dramatic. I did not threaten revenge. I asked for inspection, documentation, and written confirmation of responsibilities. That was the difference between noise and pressure. Noise makes people defensive. Pressure makes them answer questions. 2 days later, a county technician called me from a block number and asked if I still had the original 1978 drawing. His voice was careful. Too careful. I said yes. He asked whether the cabins were occupied yet. I said not yet, but Silver Pines had announced an opening weekend. There was a pause, and behind that pause I heard papers moving. Then he said, "Mr. Whitmore, do not alter the site until our office reviews this." I looked out toward the lake, where white porch lights were blinking on one by one along the east bank, even though nobody had any right to be there. I said I understood, and I did. I understood that Marjorie had built her celebration on top of a red line. The county did not move fast, but Marjorie did. By Friday afternoon, Silver Pines had turned the east bank into a postcard. White balloons bobbed from porch rails. Temporary string lights ran from pine to pine. A rented stage sat near the water where my father's old boat rack had been, covered in blue carpet and flanked by 2 banners that called the cabins a private lakeside experience. I stood behind the tree line with my phone in my hand and watched caterers unload trays from a van, watched a drone rise over my shoreline with a soft mechanical buzz, watched real estate agents in pastel shirts point toward my water like they were selling the horizon itself. The air smelled like fresh mulch, propane heaters, sweet barbecue sauce, and the sharp chemical bite of new stain drying on cedar siding. Every few minutes, one of the cabin porch lights flickered on even though the sun had not gone down yet, making the whole place glow with a fake warmth that turned my stomach. Martin had told me not to interfere. The County Water Resources Office had told me not to alter the site until they reviewed the map. So I stayed on my side of the trees, which was a strange thing to tell myself, because all of it was my side. Marjorie arrived at 4 o'clock in a navy dress and white blazer, smiling like she had never seen a boundary line in her life. People clapped when she stepped onto the stage. The HOA board stood behind her. The contractor stood near the refreshment table, checking his phone every few seconds. I noticed he did not look comfortable anymore. Neither did the HOA attorney. He had come, but he stayed near the back, holding a paper cup of coffee he never drank. Marjorie took the microphone and thanked everyone for believing in community progress. Her voice carried cleanly over the water. She talked about vision, access, fairness, and families making memories by the lake. She said Silver Pines had transformed and used land into something beautiful. and used land. I felt those words hit harder than they should have. I could see my father there for a second, knee-deep in spring mud, clearing storm debris from the spillway with a rake because he believed maintenance was a promise. I could see my grandfather's hands and the concrete edge of the dam. But Marjorie kept smiling, and the drone kept circling, and phones kept recording. Then she lifted a glass of sparkling cider and said, "Today, we take back the lake for the people who deserve it." The crowd cheered. Not everyone, but enough to make the sound roll across the surface and break apart against the trees. I recorded that sentence too. I recorded the banner. I recorded the drone. I recorded the rental check-in table with little envelopes arranged by cabin number. Cabin 17. Cabin 42. Cabin 88. Cabin 109. I recorded the brochure that showed weekend rates, cleaning fees, and a map of walking trails drawn straight across my land. I recorded a board member telling a couple from out of town that ownership issues had been resolved. I recorded Marjorie laughing when someone asked about the locked gate, telling them some people resist change until they see the benefits. By sunset, the cabins were full of people touring porches, testing keypads, taking pictures beside the water. Nobody stayed overnight because the final occupancy approval had not arrived, but deposits had been taken, contracts had been signed, and promises had been made out loud in front of witnesses. That was all Martin needed. That was all the county needed too, though Marjorie did not know it yet. Just after dark, while the last string lights trembled in the breeze and the drone made one more pass over the lake, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the county water resources technician. The original emergency release corridor was still active. The dam owner retained operational responsibility. Permanent structures inside the corridor required immediate review. I read it twice under the trees with the lake shining black beyond the cabins. Then I looked toward the spillway, where the water gauge reflected a thin strip of moonlight, and for the first time in weeks, I felt my breathing slow. Marjorie thought opening night was her victory lap. She had no idea she had just invited everyone to stand on the red line. At 5:17 the next morning, the world was still blue with dawn when I unlocked the service gate below the dam and stepped onto the concrete pad my father had poured 20 years earlier. The air was cold enough to sting my nose, and fog drifted low over the spillway like breath from something sleeping. I had already sent the final notices. The County Water Resources Office had acknowledged the active release corridor. The Sheriff's Office had been copied. Environmental Compliance had opened a file. Martin had told me the same thing 3 times. Follow the written procedure, document every step, and do not make it personal. So I did what my father had taught me. I checked the gauge. I photographed the reading. I opened the maintenance log and wrote the time in black ink. Then I wrapped both hands around the steel wheel and turned. The gate did not open with drama. It resisted first, then shifted with a low groan that moved through the concrete under my boots. Water began to pull away from the shoreline, slow and certain, the way truth moves when it no longer needs permission. Across the lake, the cabins still glowed in neat rows, porch lights floating above their reflections. Then the reflections stretched. Then they broke. By 6:10, the first wooden steps hung over mud instead of water. By 6:40, the glossy lakefront brochure had become a joke the land itself was telling. Mud flats appeared beneath cabin 17, and with them came the black pipe I had filmed before, now fully visible, angled straight toward the basin. Near cabin 42, a temporary electrical line sagged over damp ground. Behind cabin 88, the shallow concrete piers stood exposed like bad teeth. And near cabin 109, just as the sun cleared the pines, the old survey stake surfaced from the mud with the letter W still carved into it, dark and stubborn after all those years underwater. The inspectors arrived before Marjorie did. 2 county trucks, 1 sheriff's cruiser, and a white environmental compliance vehicle rolled down the gravel road Silver Pines had cut through my grass. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. Clipboards came out. Photographs were taken. Flags were placed. Measurements were called across the bank in calm voices. When Marjorie finally appeared, she stepped out of her sport utility vehicle with her phone already in her hand, saying I had sabotaged association property. The sheriff looked at the dam file. The water technician unfolded the old map on the hood of his truck. The environmental officer pointed toward the pipe under cabin 17. For the first time since I had met her, Marjorie had no sentence ready. By noon, the site was closed. By the end of the week, the occupancy approval was denied. The insurance carrier reserved its rights and stepped back. The contractor admitted Silver Pines had instructed them to work from an internal site plan, not the recorded release corridor map. The families who had paid deposits found out they had been sold access to land Silver Pines did not own. The lawsuit did not come from me first. It came from them. Months later, the cabins were removed one by one, not with spectacle, but with permits, invoices, county supervision, and a silence that felt heavier than applause. Marjorie resigned at a special meeting where nobody clapped. I stood on the east bank after the last truck left, with mud drying and cracked plates under my boots and my grandfather's lake slowly filling again behind the dam. I did not feel like I had won by destroying anything. I felt like I had finally let the land speak in a language they could not interrupt. So tell me, if someone tried to rename your family's property, sell it back to strangers, and laugh while doing it, would you have stayed as patient as I did? And if stories like this remind you that justice does not have to be loud to be powerful, stay with this channel, because some truths only become visible when the water finally pulls back.